The threat against President Ibrahim Traore was not imagined, and it was not exaggerated. It came frighteningly close to being carried out. That much became clear when several suspects appeared on national television and spoke openly about their roles. They were not careful with their words. They spoke plainly. Names were mentioned. Specific amounts of money were described. Weapons were discussed, locations were identified, messaging platforms were listed. Timelines were explained. This detail matters. It tells us this was not theater or political noise. It was a real operation that had already crossed the line from idea to action. What often gets overlooked is how far along it already was. The confessions made it clear the plan was in its final stage. Funds had already been handed out. Weapons were already in position. Meetings had already happened. Targets had already been chosen. This was not a future risk, it was imminent. Hours, not weeks. If arrests had been delayed, Burkina Faso could have woken up to violence, confusion, and another collapse of hope. Many Africans were struck by how openly the suspects spoke. They discussed encrypted platforms like Signal and Zanji without hesitation. They talked about safe houses spread across West Africa. They even explained plans to neutralize the country's air capabilities before making their move. Confessions like this are rare. Historians still don't fully agree on why people confess so fully, but in this case it revealed something important. The state didn't just interrupt a coup, it exposed it completely. For younger Africans watching, this moment landed hard. It showed that efforts to undo African-led change are still active and relentless. But it also showed something else, quieter but stronger. This time the attempt failed. And it failed because the system they expected to exploit was no longer sleeping. One of the key lessons here is that this was not the act of a single angry soldier or a handful of dissatisfied officers. The testimonies revealed a broad and organized network. Military personnel were involved. Civilian traders played roles, money couriers moved cash. Coordinators operated from outside the country. External sponsors were part of the picture. In plain terms, this was a structure, not a spontaneous event. Each person had a task. Some handled communication. Others controlled finances. Some moved weapons. Certain individuals were assigned to carry out assassinations. Others acted as links between countries. This level of coordination takes time. It requires trust and repetition. It does not appear overnight. That alone suggests the plot had been developing quietly for years. What actually mattered here wasn't obvious at the time. Many of those involved were not outsiders. They were insiders. They wore uniforms. They had access. They knew procedures and vulnerabilities. That is what made the threat so severe. When betrayal comes from within, it is harder to detect and far more destructive. Another disturbing detail was how regional the network was. Confessions connected activities to Togo, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. This was not only about Burkina Faso's internal struggle. It was tied to a broader attempt to destabilize the Sahel and weaken the new direction some countries are pursuing. For everyday citizens, this changed the conversation. People stopped asking whether the plot was real, and began asking how many similar networks might still exist. That question has not gone away. What gives this failed coup its emotional weight is not only the danger involved, but the identity of those behind it. The generation trying to derail today's changes is the same generation that failed Africa years ago. These are the same elites who remained silent when Thomas Sankara was killed. They had an opportunity to build strong, independent states. Instead, they produced systems shaped by corruption, dependency, and fear. History appears to be looping back, but not exactly the same way. This time, younger Africans are paying attention. They see clearly that the old guard is not defending democracy or stability. They are trying to reclaim lost privileges. They resent that a younger leader like Ibrahim Traore rose without their approval. They are unsettled by a system that values loyalty, sacrifice, and performance rather than age or foreign ties. This is why many see this moment as a generational confrontation. On one side is an old structure tied to France's backroom arrangements and exile maneuvering. On the other is a younger generation demanding sovereignty, dignity, and control over their future. The attempt was not only against a president. It was against an idea, and ideas do not disappear easily. You can imprison people, but ideas are harder to contain. That is why this failure carries weight. It suggests the old methods are losing their power. The youth are watching, they are learning, and they are choosing differently. At the center of this entire conspiracy stands former President Paul-Henri Damiba. According to confessions and security briefings, Damiba did not lead a popular movement or offer a vision. He managed a network from exile, primarily from Togo, using encrypted communication and personal grievances as tools. His method was deliberate and detached. He did not speak about the future of Burkina Faso, he spoke about resentment. He focused on hardship. He emphasized how certain officers felt ignored or underpaid. This was his recruitment strategy, not ideology but emotion, and that made the network fragile from the start. He leaned on old contacts from his time in power. Merchants moved money. Civilians carried messages. Soldiers were reduced to instruments. This was not leadership. It was control through manipulation without shared belief. Loyalty only lasted as long as payments continued. That explains why the plot unraveled so quickly once intelligence pressure increased. There was no deep bond holding people together. Everyone was thinking about themselves. Some even took money from the coup funds. That detail matters. Movements built this way do not survive. Damiba's role highlights a difficult truth. Politics driven from exile, fueled by cash and bitterness, cannot defeat a system supported by people on the ground. This time, the familiar playbook failed. As the confessions aired, one thing became impossible to ignore. This plot was not driven by belief, ideology, or patriotism. It was driven by money. Large sums of cash were moved quietly across borders, particularly from Ivory Coast, and then distributed inside Burkina Faso. Investigators stated that roughly 70 million CFA francs were involved. That money was intended to purchase loyalty, silence, weapons, and killings. Once money took center stage, everything began to rot. Strategy gave way to personal calculation. Everyone wanted their share. Soldiers meant to protect the country were doing mental arithmetic for profit. Civilians carrying messages were not motivated by a cause. They were chasing envelopes of cash. This distinction matters. Genuine revolutions are built on belief. People accept risk because they believe in something larger than themselves. Here, when payments were delayed or reduced, trust collapsed. Loyalty weakened, fear spread, greed replaced discipline. That is why the network fell apart so quickly under pressure. Money can trigger action, but it cannot create courage or unity. This plan had no soul. It offered nothing to the public. There were no demonstrations, no street support, no popular backing. It was a quiet scheme by people hoping power would simply land in their hands. In the end, money revealed the truth. This was never about saving Burkina Faso. It was about personal gain. History has shown repeatedly that coups rooted in greed destroy themselves. One of the most humiliating aspects of this failure is not that it failed, but how it failed. The conspirators could not even remain honest with one another. Funds meant for the operation were stolen by those entrusted with carrying it out. Officers kept cash for themselves. Arguments over payments delayed plans. One captain reportedly spent part of the coup money preparing for his wedding. Think about that for a moment. A man planning an assassination while selecting wedding clothes and hiring musicians. This detail says a lot. The group lacked focus. Comfort, pleasure, and status distracted them. This internal decay made intelligence work easier. When people steal, they talk, they slip up, they leave traces. They involve more people. Suspicion grows. Security services noticed these weaknesses early and observed quietly as the network exposed itself. There is a lesson here that is often ignored. Corruption is not only immoral. It is reckless. It makes secrecy impossible. In an odd way, their greed protected the country. While they were busy taking from each other, intelligence officers were collecting evidence. By the time arrests were made, the state already understood the entire structure. At the core of the plan was one central objective: remove the drone commander. The conspirators understood something fundamental. Air power underpins Burkina Faso's current military effectiveness. Drones monitor threats, protect troops, and strike hostile forces before civilians are harmed. By killing the drone commander, they aim to blind the state. Without coordinated drone operations, ground forces would be exposed. That vulnerability would allow armed units to approach the capital without detection. It was a calculated military move. What makes it disturbing is how casually it was discussed. Intercepted calls revealed laughter and confidence. There was no hesitation, no visible moral struggle. Murder was treated like a routine task. This shows how destructive insider betrayal can be. When someone understands a system deeply and chooses to dismantle it, the damage can be enormous. That is why stopping this plan mattered so much. Preventing that assassination preserved not just one life, but the entire security balance of the country. Once the plan came to light, it became clear how close Burkina Faso came to catastrophe. It also highlighted how crucial intelligence and timing were in stopping it. Another unsettling revelation was that the weapons were not brought in from outside, they came from within the state. A senior non-commissioned officer used official access to move machine guns and ammunition through the capital without raising alarms. This confirms a fear shared by many Africans: the greatest threats often come from inside. Because he wore a uniform and carried authority, no one questioned him. Trust was exploited. Weapons meant to defend the nation nearly became tools to destroy it. Yet this also underscores the effectiveness of the intelligence operation. Security forces did not rush, they observed. They tracked the movement of weapons. They noted locations and timing, then they acted. Arrests were made with weapons present, cash on site, and plans active. There was no ambiguity. The evidence was undeniable. This forced a hard national reckoning. Rank means little without loyalty. Access without integrity is dangerous. This realization is now shaping serious reforms within the military. What many are only beginning to grasp is that Burkina Faso's intelligence services were not reacting in panic. They were already embedded in the conspiracy. Weeks before any arrests, they knew about meetings, money transfers, weapon movements, and individual roles. This was not chance. It was patient, methodical intelligence work. Rather than acting too soon, the state chose to observe. It listened, it followed movements quietly. It allowed the network to reveal itself fully. This approach requires restraint and confidence. Acting too early can hide deeper connections and protect those pulling strings. By late December, intelligence officers reportedly knew exact locations, precise timings, and the identities of participants. They knew who was meeting whom. They knew where weapons were going. They even knew about assassination plans. Awareness at this level comes from long-term monitoring, not luck. That is why the arrests were so targeted. There was no disorder, no sweeping arrests. Key figures were detained at moments when evidence was strongest. This ensured that confessions would be detailed and difficult to dispute. For many Africans, this changed perceptions of the state. It showed a system that is no longer weak or inattentive. It is adapting, it is learning, and it can defend itself quietly. The timing of the arrests tells its own story. Security forces intervened roughly 1 hour before the operation was set to begin. This was deliberate. Waiting until the final moment ensured the conspiracy was fully active. Funds were distributed. Weapons were ready. Vehicles were moving. Orders had been issued. At that point, no one could claim it was just talk. The evidence was complete. This strategy achieved two things. It prevented violence and it exposed the full network, including foreign connections. Acting earlier would have shielded those operating from the shadows. Waiting allowed intelligence to map everything. That is why the confessions were so thorough. The suspects understood the state already had proof. Denial offered no benefit. Confession offered a chance at reduced punishment. Silence would only deepen public consequences. This moment carried weight. It showed the state was not improvising. It was executing a plan. And that sends a clear message to anyone considering a repeat. One of the most troubling discoveries is that this plot was not limited to Burkina Faso. It extended into Togo, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. Money flowed across borders. Communication crossed borders. Coordination crossed borders. This reveals a deeper issue in West Africa. Political instability has become regional. A coup attempt in one country affects many others. Leaders who lose power often seek refuge and support elsewhere. The confessions exposed the mechanics of exile politics. Former leaders use neighboring states as safe zones. They rely on digital communication, discrete money transfers, and regional vulnerabilities. This creates diplomatic strain and raises serious questions. Many Africans are now asking whether countries will extradite coup plotters or continue offering protection under diplomatic cover. The answer will shape the future of regional unity. This is no longer only about Burkina Faso, it is about whether Africa can safeguard its own political transitions. While suspects were confessing on television, something else was unfolding quietly. New leaders were being promoted, fighters who earned respect through sacrifice were rising. The contrast was striking. The old guard asked for forgiveness. The younger generation was entrusted with responsibility. This signals a shift. Power is slowly moving away from networks built on corruption and foreign allegiance toward individuals tested on the ground. For African youth, this matters. It shows that betrayal leads to disgrace, not reward. It also shows that loyalty and service can lead to leadership. This failed coup was more than a security success. It was symbolic. It demonstrated that the old tactics are losing effectiveness. The era of backroom coups and exile plotting is fading. A new Africa is not guaranteed, but moments like this suggest it is possible.